This is Bennie Fox. When I was born, they named me Albert Benjamin Fox, and I lived in the little town of called Smith Ferry, and we lived a little outside of town in a house that my dad built when they first married. And I'll try to tell a few incidents that happened. One thing that stands out to my mind is when I was a little bitty baby. I don't know how old, maybe a couple of weeks. While my mother and dad went down to pick up wood for the stove and fireplace, we lived in a forest. My dad had his house. It had 3 bedrooms on the south side, and the living room, a big fireplace, and the kitchen on the north side. And the steps went down to the west. And anyway, they went to get wood in the wagon. We lived in the forest, and they put a sideboard on the wagon where they could throw the wood over against the sideboard, and it would fall down in the wagon. I went down through the forest hunting chunks of wood that would fit in the fireplace and stove, or he could cut up into it. And they put me in a little box and put me up in the wagon seat. And they spent almost the whole afternoon picking up wood, having a good time, talking and visiting together. And we went back home and unloaded the wood, of course. And that night, of course, they went to bed. That night, my mother was on the other side of the bed. My dad was on the outside, and I was sleeping in between them. Didn't have a baby crib, and she was dreaming that she was throwing wood in the wagon. So she picked me up and threw me over my dad out in the floor, and the floor didn't have a rug on it, and my head hit the floor, kabang, and Mama cried, "Oh, Papa, I've killed the baby, I've killed the baby, oh my Lord." And he got up as quick as he could and lit the lamp and rolled me over. I was asleep. He said, "Well, Mama, he's sound asleep." She said, "No, I know he's dead. He couldn't live through that." So she got him into bed and got me into bed and felt my legs and my arms and felt of my head, and I was all right. So if I act funny, that's the reason I do, because I was threw out of the bed. Oh, and at that same house, later on, my daddy and my mother was sitting out. They heard a racket, and we had a big old stud horse, and he was chasing a yearling calf out in the lot, and it woke them up. And while they were sitting there, they heard to their back, they heard the gate unlatch, and my dad looked around and he said, "It's a Negro." And he got up and reached over the living room door, and got his rifle. And the guy was creeping along the fence, and he shot at him, bang. And then the guy jumped the fence and ran off, and he shot at him again. And when he got through talking to him, he said, "You know who that was?" I said, "Right, just now I recognized him." He said, "That was the guy that helped me kill hogs today. And he came back to steal some meat." So the next day was Sunday. So they loaded up and took the guy some meat that helped him, which was the guy that was coming that night to steal it. And took him a good bunch of meat and visited him, and the guy didn't have He didn't have a gunshot on him at all, so my dad was glad about that. At this same place where we lived, I was a little crawling baby. Of course, that was a little later on. And my mother was busy in the kitchen, and I had crawled out of her reach and crawled down those steps and crawled out into the lot where the horse was. And my mother missed me after a while and couldn't see me anywhere, and she looked out in the lot, and this stud horse was raising up his front feet and pawing down, and I was right under his belly. I'd crawl right up under his little old belly, his big belly. And Mother ran out there hollering and screaming and scared the horse away, and there wasn't a scratch on me, so I'm still a living.
That one is right here. Right, no, that's it.
After that incident, well, I don't remember anything else till we moved to Jasper, Texas, and my daddy built another new house, and we lived there a good while. I don't know how long, but I do remember one incident that happened. It was Easter, the night before Easter, and the Easter rabbit was supposed to come that night. So my daddy put his hat outside of the gate, and we all listened for the rabbit and waited. And after a while, we forgot about the rabbit and the eggs. And sometime during the waiting period, my mother had gone out and filled the hat with nice boiled eggs, all colors. And after a while, my dad said, "Listen, did you hear something?" And my brother L.B. said, "I heard something." And my dad said it was probably that rabbit bumped into the gate or something out there. He said, "Let's go see." So all four of us boys went out there, and there was a hat. We opened the gate, and there was a hat half full of eggs. So we went back in, and Mama put a quilt, spread an old quilt out on the floor, and we sat out there, sat on that quilt and ate eggs till we were full. And my little brother Cecil said, "These eggs taste just like hen eggs." So that's all I remember about that incident. When we lived at Jasper, my daddy worked in the timber, sawed logs, worked at the big old sawmill, and later on, I don't know when it was, we moved to Oklahoma and moved to a rooming house. But on the way to Oklahoma, I'll tell this first, my mother had bought my younger brother, younger than me, I think I was about 7 then, and he was about 5. She had bought us new blue serge caps, and oh, we were so proud of those caps. And I lost mine in Dallas. I looked out the window when the train left, and I dropped my cap, and it fell on the railroad track. And I hollered, "Papa, Papa, stop the train, stop the train. I've lost my cap." He said, "I can't stop the train, Benny." And my mother said, when we get to Oklahoma, I'll find you another cap." So I'm kind of getting messed up now. I'm going to have to wait a while. I want to go back and tell a story as we was coming from Longview, Texas to Dallas. Why, we stayed in the big Union Depot all night and all the next day, and left the train out that next night, next afternoon late. And we had to sleep on the concrete seats. Mama put us to bed, lay us down, and I guess they sit up all night. And anyway, and then the train left the next morning, and that's when I dropped my cap. Then we went on to Oklahoma, and my dad left us at a hotel, and went to look for a place to rent to live. He had made some money in the logging business, and then he sold his property later on for $1 an acre, 600 acres of timber for $1 an acre. Isn't that pitiful? Anyway, we went to and we at the place where we were staying at the rooming house, they had a flying jenny. They had a big board like a 2x12 balanced on a stump or on a block of wood or something. And this flying jenny was going around and around. The kids would push it and the others would ride on it, and I fell off of it, and the 2x12 hit my forehead and made a great big knot come on it. And I cried and cried, and Mama comforted me and put some stuff on it and kissed it, and it got all right. And then after that, we moved to a place out in the country, and my brother Willie was born that summer when I was 10 years old. And my daddy sent us to stay with a neighbor while the doctor came and brought the baby. So instead of going to the neighbor, we crawled in the hayloft and stayed all night, or stayed all day rather. And after the doctor left, after a while, Papa come out and look for us, and we came in. And then at that same house, where we lived, we woke up one morning, and the chickens was all gone. It had come a snowstorm that night, and we looked for the chickens, and we heard an old rooster crowing, and we dug down in the snowbank, and he had 4 hens and himself in a thawed out place in the snowbank, and crowing his way. And at that same place, I was visiting a neighbor friend one day, and I admired a little chicken he had, naked. The little chicken was almost completely naked. And he said, "Would you like to have that little chicken?" I said, "Yes, sir, I sure would." So he gave him to me. And I took him home and put him out in the yard with the other chickens, and they started pecking him because he was naked. And it was pecking his little rear end until it was bleeding. So my sister Maudie was 2 years older than me. She made him a little coat, completely covered him with leggings and everything on it, and she tied it on with strings and stuff and sewed it. And
No.
I forgot to tell you in my story that when we moved from where we were staying in a hotel, where Daddy rented a place, and we moved to a house out in the country, of course. And my dad had come to Oklahoma to quit drinking with the boys in Texas, but he got with a bunch of guys, the neighbor guys, and he came home tighter than a jug. And he got the razor strap and was whipping my oldest brother, and my mother ran in and rescued my brother from him and got him quietened down. And later on, she got him towed out to the cow lot, and we had a corn crib, and we had a lot of corn and stuff back in the corn. And she said, "Papa, you'll have to get in the corn crib to get something for the horses." So he crawled in there, and she locked the door on the outside, it had a barricade on it, and went home, left him in there. And way in the night, she heard him calling, "Sudie, Sudie, oh, Sudie." So she finally went down and let him out and led him to the house. And the next morning, everybody got up, and my mama was packing suitcases and a big barrel with clothes and stuff. And he said, my daddy got up and said, "What are you doing, Mama?" She said, "I'm going to move back to Texas with taking the boys with me." And he said, "If you won't go," he begged her not to go, and he said, "If you won't go," he said, "I'll promise you that I'll never take another drop of whiskey." And she said, "You've never told me that before." He said, "Well, I really mean it, Mama." So from that on, he never did take another drop of whiskey in his life. After we left that place, well, my dad rented another place with a great big old house with a big cellar with a stairway down, and we had a orchard there, and we had some cherries out in it. And my little brother, and he couldn't walk, but he could crawl, and he had crawled out to this orchard and ate the cherries, seed and all, that had fell on the ground, and they blocked his little bowels, and in a few days he died. And at that same place, why, before he died, why, we was out on the front porch, sitting on the front porch steps. He had a little 22, a little Stevens Favorite 22, and we was shooting at an old stump on the cedar tree, making out like it was a rabbit. And my mother was sitting up on the porch rocking the baby. I got ahead of my story a while ago. And it came my time to shoot. I was about 7 years old. And when I went to pull the trigger, my little brother Cecil was about 3 years old, maybe 3 or 4. And when I pulled the trigger, well, his little temple was right at his gun barrel. He had walked by and I didn't know it. And when I pulled the trigger, it snapped. The gun snapped. And he walked on by, and I just knew I'd killed him, because when I pulled the trigger, there was his temple right down the sight. And my brother said, "Let me have that gun," my older brother. And he looked at it, and he put the bullet back in it, and pulled the trigger, and it shot. And it never had snapped at misfire, before that, and it never did misfire after that. And my brother still has that gun up in Paradise Valley in California. So I want to pause a minute. At this same house where we lived, why, Mama ordered us boys. I was about 8, and the other brother was 6, and the other little brother was 4. And she brought us some new shirts, and my daddy talked us into not putting our breeches on, just wearing the shirts alone. And we was out walking around in the corn patch, what way I remember, and a neighbor came by, and he hollered, "Hello, girls." And boy, that did it. We went home and put our trousers on and put our shirts tails down inside of our trousers, and we never did go trouserless anymore. We had the little breeches that came to our knees, wasn't long breeches, and we never did do that anymore. In that same place, I was 8.5 years old, and my daddy took an old cultivator wheel, orange cultivator wheel, and put a wash tub on top of it, tied it down, put a board in front of it for my feet, and he hooked the old horse up to it, an old bear, and he had me out in the cotton patch, pulling that wheel behind the horse, and it wiped out all the crop grass in the middle of the road. And finally, I made several rounds. I'd go to the end of the road, skip several rows, turn around and in a room to get on another row. And finally I went to sleep. And while I was asleep, we got to the end of the row, and the old horse began to turn around, but she turned too quick and turned the wheel over, tub and all, and I fell in the dirt and began to cry. And I was only 8.5 years old, and I just bawling like a baby. And I finally got the thing turned back up, and it got the horse on the right road. And when I got to the other end of the row, why, I don't know why, but my dad showed up. And I know he could see the tear stains down my dusty head, my dusty face. And he said, Benny, he said, why don't we knock off for the rest of the day? He said, you've done enough for the day. And so we went home, and that was the end of that little story. After that, we moved back to Texas, and we moved to a little town called Pineland, Texas. And instead of Papa buying a house, building a house, he got a great big tent and put a floor in it and walled up the sides with lumber, and we lived in that. And one day everybody was gone but LB and I, and Papa had left his Winchester sitting in a corner, and LB got it and shot a hole through the top of the tent. And it scared me, and I told him about it when he came in. So after that, he unloaded the gun while he was gone from the tent, but he couldn't hide it there. And while we was living there, we read in the paper where we could, if we sold enough ivory soap, we could win a little wagon from the soap company if we sold so many 100 bars of soap, 1,000 bars, I guess. So we sold soap till Mama bought all she could, and we went out through the little town and sold soap and sold soap. And my oldest brother come in to say, I just don't believe we'll ever sell enough soap to get that wagon. It was a wagon similar to a big wagon. I'll tell you about the wagon later though. And he'd look at the advertisement of this pretty little wagon, and he'd say, let's try again. So we'd try to sell soap again. Finally we got the soap all sold and sent in the money, last money. We didn't get a penny to sell it, we just got the wagon. And they sent the wagon all broke down in boxes. So we had the joy of putting it all together. It had little shafts in it, not a tongue, because a tongue is for 2 horses, a shaft is for 1 horse, you know. So we hooked it all up, and we had already had a goat. I forgot to tell that first. And we had an old billy goat. He had little horns about 4 inches long, and we had trained him to work. My oldest brother Frank had made him some leather out of an old belting, out of belting, not leather belting, but cloth belting. Made him some harness, and we'd go down in the woods, and he'd drag up little logs, and us boys would sew them up in the wood, and we had trained him to work. If he stopped, well, Frank could hit him, had a little switch, he'd hit him and say, go on, Billy, go on, Billy, go on. And old Billy would start pulling. So when we got those shafts, my brother hooked him up to those shafts, and had the harness and everything. It had a little single tree and everything, you know, and a little yoke piece at the front. I forgot what you call that little piece. Anyway, he had it all hooked up, and we drove all over town with that little wagon, and everybody looked at that little wagon. It was a precise made wagon, just like a big wagon. It was yellow and green. Oh, it was a beautiful thing. So we went to the box car on the railroad, brought ice twice a week, and we went down to get ice, and we was going to get Mama a 50-pound block of ice, and the neighbor wanted us to bring her a 50-pound block of ice. So my brother got in the front seat, the wagon seat, and the other two brothers, or three brothers, got in the back in their little wagon and went to town to get the ice. And we went to got the ice and paid for it, and we're starting home through the street, and a dog got after the goat that was pulling the wagon, and the goat ran and ran, and my brother was sitting up in the seat saying, "Whoa, Billy, whoa, Billy, whoa, Billy, whoa, Billy," and Billy didn't whoa, and he rounded the corner and turned the wagon, ice and the boys and everything right out in the dust, and we finally got righted up, got the wagon turned back over, nothing was hurt, but we spilled the ice in the sand. And when we got home, my mother made us go back to town and get a new ice for the other woman, and she kept the other two, and we went back and got her another 50-pound block of ice, and the dog didn't run us this time. So after that, we're going to pause for a while. Thank you.
Yeah, right now.
I'll tell you about that little wagon and the goat. I've wondered all my life what ever happened to the goat and the little wagon. Why we didn't take it to Oklahoma when we moved back to Oklahoma. But I just imagined my daddy talked us out of it because it'd be a lot of trouble to send the goat. I don't know whether I'm telling this story all in line or not, but when we came back to Oklahoma from Pineland, Texas, we lived in Comanche, Oklahoma for a while, and Daddy drove a tray wagon and also a little wagon that took bread and some groceries around, and I forgot now what it called it, but he drove that for a while from off down through the streets and made a living at it. And while we lived at that house, I went outside and I found my brother younger than me beating up clear glass and feeding to my younger brother, and he was making out like it was sugar, and he was taking a spoon and putting the broken up glass in it and feeding the little brother. And I saw him, and I run in and told Mom, and she come running out there and got the little kid that was eating the glass and spanked the big boy, I think. I went in and give the little boy some bread and some potatoes and stuff to take care of his little stomach when the glass was in it. And that same boy that was beating up the glass, LB, he went to play with a little neighbor, and he told him that these big old red ants that sting you, he said, "These won't sting you." He said, "You can put them down your collar and they won't hurt." And he put a whole bunch of them down this kid's collar, and after a while they began to sting him. And he ran in the house and told his mama, and she came out fighting mad, and she run us off. And I didn't know that them ants wouldn't sting. And he had lied to that kid and told him those ants wouldn't sting. Oh boy, oh boy. I want to pause for a few minutes. I remember we moved west of Barlow and Duncan, and my daddy worked in the oil fields for a while. And while we lived there, there was at the old Beaver schoolhouse, they put up a big brush arbor place to have a revival, and we went every night. My dad had a nice wagon with bows and sheets, like the old travelers used to have, and we went to the revival every night. And I remember my dad going to the altar, had an old plank over with sawdust on the floor, and remember him going to the altar and kneeling down, and big old tears falling down on the altar, and he gave his heart to the Lord. And after that, he was a Christian from then on. And I never heard him curse or get rough with us boys, only just snap his finger and we'd mind him. mother always used a razor strap. She called it a strap. But my dad, he had our respect. I know one time I left his handsaw out, and it got dew on it. He had a brand new handsaw, and I left it out. And the next morning he found it out there, and he said, "Which one of you boys left the saw out?" And somebody squealed on me. He said, "I saw Benny use it yesterday." And he said, "Now you boys are going to have to be careful about things like this." He said, "I might not be around always to look after you." But he never put me down. He never scolded me. He just said, "Be more careful, son." So that meant a lot to me. And when we lived at that house, we had to haul water from a half mile east of us in a wooden barrel. And every few days we'd have to go get a new barrel full of water. And nearly half of it spilled out because there was part of the road that tilted over behind our barn, and part of the water all spilled out. And we lived in a little old box house that Mama tried to keep the wind out by putting paste the seasonal book catalog over the cracks in the house. It was just 1 by 12 box house with a 2x4 over the crack, and no studs or anything, just the wall, outside wall. It was a very poor house. And my daddy was working in the oil field, and we all took the flu, this same house. And there's thrashing the wheat out of the stalks of wheat. And I know how I felt big, very big, being water boy, and they was paying me $4 a day for it. And I was only 11 years old. Now, everything is not in line what I'm telling, but I'm doing the best I can, so you'll have to put up with me. Now I'm going to pause for a minute and think something. Now, going back to the next fall after I was a water boy, why, that was in the year 1918 in December, and we all took the flu. My daddy was working oil. He was up in the oil derrick, working for the oil company. And Frank had the flu, Marty had the flu, LB had the flu, and I had the flu. And Papa come in at midnight. He worked from 12 at noon till midnight at night, 12-hour shifts, 7 days a week. And he came in and he said, "Mama, I've got it." So she put him to bed, and she had the flu, but she never did go to bed. She waited on us, on the family of us. And Marty was real bad. So on the 26th of December, she passed away. And Mama come to Papa's bed, and she said, "Papa," the reason we call him Papa, well, us kids always called him Papa, and she did too. She said, "Papa, little Marty's gone." And he said, "Oh my," he said, "won't it be wonderful when we all get up there?" And turned over and began to groan and shiver. He was suffering awful with pneumonia. And the next day, the doctor came, and he said, "Mr. Fox won't last over another day." And he said, "Your oldest son won't make it." Said his pneumonia's too far gone. She said, "Won't make it." And anyway, the next day, My mama was sitting at the head of Papa's bed, and I was sitting at the foot of his bed, holding his feet on the bed. His feet was ice cold, and he kept wanting to shove one of them off on the floor. And I kept pushing his foot back on the bed, and all at once he sat up. He couldn't move. His pneumonia had him paralyzed. And all at once he sat up in bed with his own power and leaned forward and looked like he was looking at something. And my mama said, "Papa, what is it?" He said, "It's Jesus. He's come after me." And lay back down. In a few minutes he was dead. So I'll always remember that where my daddy is, that's where I want to go someday. I'll soon be 90, and that probably won't be very long till I'll go. And I'll pause a minute and tell you something later. We had a neighbor lady that lived a half-mile east of us, and she came down often to help Mama all she could. And Mama told her that what the doctor had said about Frank, that he couldn't make it. He was 16, and I was still 11, and I was little to my age. And she said, "I don't know how in the world I can get by without Frank." And she said, "Well, Miss Fox," said, "let's see if what the Lord thinks about it." Said, "Let's pray that the Lord will spare him if it's His will." So I remember them getting down by the bed and praying. Both of them was praying at one time. And directly the lady laid her hand on my mama's shoulder and said, "Miss Fox, you can stop praying. Frank's going to get well." And my mama said, "Well, praise the Lord." And after that, Frank began to get better as the days went by. And of course, my sister had already passed, and I don't know whether I told you about Dad. Yeah, I told you about that, didn't I? He was dying, dead. So after that, we stayed there a while and then moved back to Texas later on. I'll tell you about that. After that, my mother, when that fall, after Papa died in the spring, we had a sale, and we sold all the farming instruments and the cattle and the horses. We had some beautiful span of mares a year apart, twin sisters almost. She sold those and all the furniture, and we moved back to Texas, went to Lufkin, Texas first. Lived there a while. I went to school, and I dug me some marble holes outside the school house. And when I came out for recess, another boy had my marble holes, and I lit into him, and I began to hit him. And about that time, this teacher came out and saw us fighting, and she made us sit out on the curb around the schoolhouse, the block, made us sit out there for a week together, side by side, and we became real good friends. And after we left Lufkin, Texas, we went back to East Texas, Tyler County they called it, not close to Tyler, Texas, it's way on down. And we rented a house, and Frank went to work, and I went to school. I was in the 8th grade, I think, or 7th or 8th grade then. But when I was in the 8th grade, well, before that, it came a big rain one day. I mean, it rained. And on down that the house was kind of up on a bluff, and down a little bit further there was a big place where there was a lot of water collected. And Cecil and I went down there. He was about 9, I guess. And we went to swimming, and he hadn't learned to swim. And I swam across the little water, and he tried to swim and he went down. And directly he came up, and he went down again. And before he went down the third time, I grabbed a bush that was close to the water and reached out and got him by the hair and drug him to the shore, pulled him on out. And I said to Cecil, I said, don't tell Mama or she never will let us go swimming again. So we never did tell Mama that he almost drowned. After I almost shot him that time, while I saved him from drowning this time. And I remember at that same place where we lived, I went to school. All I remember about school was looking out the window and seeing a woodpecker pecking on an old pine tree. And I'd look at that, and the teacher would say, "Benny, are you listening?" "Yes, ma'am." And at that same schoolhouse, I may be getting ahead of myself, but they was playing basketball, and LB was whittling on a stick, and they kept hitting him with that ball on purpose. And he got tired of it. He said, "If you don't quit hitting me with that ball, I'm going to stick my knife in it." So they didn't quit. They kept hitting him with the ball, and he stuck his knife in it, and all the wind come out of it. And for that, the teacher called him in and proceeded to give him a good whipping. She sent somebody after a switch, and she began to whip him with his switch. And we tried to tell her that he warned the boys to quit, but she wouldn't listen. She was a little old young teacher. Her name was Primrose. Her last name was Primrose. I worked for her daddy after that. And anyway, I got bad. She's hitting him with a stick, and I said, I held that stick. I said, "If you hit him one more time, it'll be too late." I said, "I dare you to hit him one more lick." And she quit. And I don't remember anything else about that then. But next Sunday, one of the school board members said, "Oh, she told me she's going to expel me for my rude talking to her." And the man told me, said, "Benny, we don't want you to quit school." I said, "I'm not going to quit school." I said, "She's not big enough to make me quit school." I was mad. And he said, "Well, we don't want you to be hateful about it, but don't quit school." So the next day, Claude Dash and I would come in late, and we never had wore long breeches before, but that day we wore long breeches, and we went by and got a switch about 6 feet long out of real good dogwood timber, dogwood bush, and we brought it to the teacher. And she never did scold us, aggravate us anymore. But years later, I was working for her daddy over in another county, and she walked up to me one day and she said, "Benny, what would you have done if I'd have hit your brother another lick that day?" I said, "Well, I tell you," I called her name, I forgot it now. I said, "I hadn't mind." She had plaited hair down her back. I said, "I hadn't mind to get you by that plaited hair and dragging you down the aisle." And she said, "You'd probably done it." I said, "Well, at that time, I think I would, sir, Miss Primrose." And that's all I remember about that. Only I worked for that man for a long time. And we worked down in the bottom country and cut olive trees, mistletoe trees. No, not that. I forgot what kind of trees. We went down in the bottom and cut those trees down for the cows to eat. They had stickers on them. I forgot the name of them. Excuse me while I cough. Anyway, we would go down there and in a wagon and load up hogs and bring them in to fatten out. They would run wild down there. And we'd cut timber for the cows and bring some hay in the wagon. When we'd pin these hogs up, we had like you herd cattle in a bins, we had a place where we'd herd the cows, the hogs into this pen, and then we'd bag this wagon out. It had a low place where the hogs would walk right in and we'd scare them in there, and we'd bring them home, and he'd fatten them out for about a month on regular corn, red yellow corn, and then we'd kick them to market. And we killed about 30 hogs that year. He took them to town. We'd kill them one day, and he'd take them to town the next day and sell them to butcher shops. And that same man, he and I became good friends, and he learned me to sing bass. And we used to sing a song about, what was it now? I forgot now what it was. Anyway, we had a lot of sugar cane, so we made sugar cane syrup, and he'd carry the sugar cane syrup to town and sell it in gallon buckets for $1 a gallon. Boy, was that good sugar cane syrup. I really loved it. I'll pause a minute. After that, I went fishing one day by myself down in the river bottom at an old slough where the river had ran through there years before, that left stagnant water. And I caught a big old fish, an old grinnell fish, about, he must have been 18 inches long. And I went back up the hill and put him behind a big pine tree, and I didn't have nothing to tie him up with. And I went back to fishing again, and I heard a racket, and looked back, and here come that fish down the bank, down the hill, a-flopping, and he flopped and he flopped till he come plumb back to the water and got in the water again. And I kept a-fishing, and I caught the same old fish again, so I finally just threw him back. And when I went home, I was hungry. I went by my uncle's house, and I looked in the cupboard and found some cornbread and turnip greens. So I got me a plate and went to eating those. And I heard something coming up the steps of the house. Chomp, 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 about 4 or 5 steps. And in my mind I said, what in the world is that? And I thought it was a boy coming in on tom walkers. And I stayed still, eating my cornbread and turnip greens. And he kept on coming, and he'd come on the porch, come into the living room, and it would stop and go doom, 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 doom. And he'd come across the living room, big living room, must have been 20 foot wide or more. And he came into a bedroom with 2 beds side by side with an aisle between them, maybe 3 foot aisle between them. And the boy that I thought was a boy come between those beds and stopped just before he got to the kitchen. And I thought I'd scare him, and so I stuck my head out of the kitchen broom was in the corner, and he wheeled around and started to run out, and he almost fell in one of the beds, and he ran through the living room then, and he'd fall down, and I was hitting him with a broom at every jump, broom, and a hollering, a hooping, and a hollering, a squalling, and I don't know what I was saying, but anyway, that mule was scared nearly to death. And he finally went on through the porch and didn't go down the steps. He jumped from the porch out into the yard and ran through the yard. It was about 50 feet out there to the fence, and he ran outside of the fence and turned around and said, "Whew." That's all of that story. I want to tell you another incident that happened in my life. I was working at a sawmill, and it wasn't a very big sawmill, but they had 2 boilers, one large boiler and one smaller boiler. And my job was to, when the log wagons come in, I was to, I had an instrument that you'd only find in the lumber business, that you put across the top of a log, say a 16-foot log, you put it across the top of the log and read it, and it'll tell you how many lumber feet is in that log. And my other job was, when the sawmill was running, was to run what they called a button saw, almost in front of the boiler. And when they slabbed the bark off of the logs on four sides, well, it came on rollers down to me, and I had a saw, what they called a button saw. It was a 24-inch saw, quarter-inch thick, and I had a handle on it, and I'd pull it across the bark and cut it in 6 and 8 foot lengths and throw over the dolly to where they could have it to burn to dry kill lumber with. And I accidentally cut my finger. It's got a crooked place on it now. And I had, before that, I'd gone down to the boiler and put my shirt out where it was dried. I had sweated and got it wet with sweat. And when I went down there, I noticed, put my shirt on, and I noticed the water gauge, a tube to tell how much water was in the boiler, was gone. It wasn't on there. And I said, "Are you firing this boiler without a water gauge?" He said, "Yeah, Sonny." He said, "I've been firing boilers for 20 years. He said, "I know all about the DAM thing." And he said, "Well, I know when a certain sound, why, I know when she needs water." So I put my shirt on and walked about 100 or 150 yards, kind of sideways from the boiler, and all at once the ground shook, and the awfulest explosion as you ever heard. And I was going towards the commissary, or rolling a Bull Durham cigarette. I smoked a little bit in those days. And here come the foreman running. He said, "We got to call the doctor." He said, "Some men was killed." So I ran back to the sawmill, and the whole sawmill shed had fell down, and the boiler had blown up, the whole front of it. What happened? The boiler man hollered to the other boiler man, and we had they had a pump there in a little creek that ran close to the sawmill, and it pumped water when they would turn a little handle on. Didn't have a switch, just a little lever, and that pump would pump water into the boiler. And that boiler was so hot, it wasn't red hot, it was white hot. Those crown sheets in the boiler were so hot, when that cold water hit it, it was like an atomic bomb. It blew the front of that boiler for 150 feet out through the shrubbery and short pine trees. And the little man down was firing the little boiler. This guy had asked him to turn the water on, and when he stooped down to turn the water on, when the boiler blew up, it threw a piece of steel through his hip, and it came out through his shoulder. But the old man that was firing the boiler, that in front of the boiler, we picked him up in potato baskets, and it was an awful sight, terrible sight. It still bothers me to think about it, how near I come of getting killed. And I told we put the little old man that the steel was through his hip on the pallet till the truck could get there to take him to town, and he called me his Bennie boy, and because I was just a kid. And I told him, I said, "I'll come to see you tomorrow afternoon at the hospital." So when I got to the hospital the next day, they said he died the day before, so he didn't last very long. Well, I caught a ride somewhere or another and got back home late Saturday evening. And when I went in the house, my mother was there by herself, and she said, "Benny, what happened to you last Thursday?" I said, "Did somebody tell you?" She said, "Tell me what?" And then I told her what happened, and she said, "Well, I knew something was wrong because something told me, and it had to be the Spirit, to go pray for Benny. He was in trouble, in danger. So she prayed for me, and the Lord delivered me from that awful blast. And I thank the Lord for that. And it had to be the Spirit of the Lord talking to my mother. Amen. I'll tell you another story. When we lived in Oklahoma, a place we had, my dad had rented, had a nice pasture in it, and the farmland too. And I was down. There was a little creek ran through the pasture land, and I was down there. The creek, it was dry that summer, and I was walking down through that little creek, and a bunch of crows got after me, and they flew right down and was flogging me, and I was fighting them off, and there must have been 1,000 of those crows about to come down and eat me up. And boy, did I get out of there and run. And I ran back to the house. So that's the end of that little story. I want to tell you another little incident. After my father died, I used to go, I was very lonesome looking for him all the time. And about a half a mile north of where we lived, we were on a section line, and about a half a mile up there was a great big center post. Wire went 4 different ways from the post, because up there was a fence. Everything was fenced in, and I used to go up there and sit on that old post for hours, and imagine that I could see my daddy coming back down the road from the cemetery. And I'd sit there and I'd actually look and I'd think, well, if the Lord could make him come back. And I was a sad little boy, and I was 12 years old then. Thank you. I'll tell you about my father, my dad. We called him Papa. When us boys would do something, if we was making something, or picking cotton, or chopping cotton, or helping to hay fields, or doing anything, he'd say, you boys are doing that almost as well as I could do it myself. And he would brag on us, and it would tickle me down in my heart that my daddy was approving of what I did so long and good. And I had a mighty good dad. I want to tell you about a time when I was a little boy. I think maybe I was around 10. The cows were grazing up north of our house in a nice green pasture. We used to get lots of rain back there. And I noticed, I told my mother, I said, Mama, does that look like a wolf up there with the cows? She said, yeah, it is. I said, can I have the Winchester and go shoot at him? She said, yeah, if you'll be real careful, not shoot into the cows, get him off to one distance from them. So I stepped up, got the cows between me and the wolf, and before I got too close, well, he ran. And as he ran, I followed him with a rifle and shot at him, and he jumped over the fence, and I shot at him again, and I don't know whether I hit him or not. But anyway, he ran off. Now I tell you what I want to do. I want to play you a little tune on the harmonica. I'll play a jazzy one first, then I'll play a little religious song. Oh, Casey said just before he died, the 2 more railroads he'd like to ride. The farmer said, Casey, what could it be? He said, the Southern Pacific and the Santa Fe. Mrs. Casey said, go to bed, children, and hush your crying. You got another daddy on the Salt Lake line. Old Casey said to the farmer, he said, we're going to reach Frisco, but we'll all be dead. I'm going to tell you about when I went up to Illinois to do a rewire a big warehouse and storage building for the company, Halliburton Company. That I had to go to St. Louis to buy the material, which was quite a ways off, and got back and I'll tell you how the wiring was. It was so overheated that you couldn't hold your hand on the conduit going to the lab where they do the lab work. And I rewired the whole building, fixtures, new conduit, new light fixtures, and a new switch box. I had a 400 amp main switch with 36 circuits lighting panel. But after I got all the part of the place wired, I got up and was cutting the wires loose, and it was a non-grounded wiring system, and that is a dangerous one. When they had 3 wires, one wire on that side to the center wire was 120. The other wire to the center wire was 120, and that center wire is supposed to be grounded with a grounded system. But I didn't notice it wasn't grounded, so I got up and was cutting the wires loose, and when I got a hold of that, I had disconnected the 2 hot wires, and when I reached out and cut that supposed to be the grounded wire, well, it helped me. And I was standing, had my arm wrapped around an angle iron, and my pliers a hold of the wire, and my feet were standing down on the frame of the building. And I was lucky enough that I hollered to a guy. I said, "Go pull the main switch." And it dawned on me that I'd already done that and backed every plug out, every motor breaker. And I had sense enough to back my feet off of that steel building material there, and I fell down on a balcony about 5 feet down, and I was shaking all over. If I'd have stayed there very long, it would have killed me. The only thing it didn't kill, it wasn't going directed to the ground.